Werewolf is my best friend. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I kind of get bored with the long introductions some people send you. I want to start with the time I met the creature who is now my werewolf friend. It was a cool spring night in 2020, and I was actually in the woods camping alone because my friends had all gone to protest things that I didn't want to protest. It was one of those years, if you can remember. I camped whenever I could in those days because there were too many rules for living in the human world, and I thought most of those rules were insulting and idiotic. I have a patch of woods behind my home that leads into some pretty wild land. At a national park, I won't say which one, I can be fairly deep into the North American temperate forest jungle in less than a half hour walking from my home. In the woods, there is only the law of nature. Nature is harsh. Nature can be cruel. But at least nature isn't insane. Nature won't demand to see your vaccine record. Nature is logical. That's why it will still be here long after humans have all self-immolated. And so when I first saw the werewolf, I was drawn to it as sort of the ultimate symbol of nature itself. I thought it was a Dogman at the time. I thought it was the living spirit of the Midwestern woods. I really did. So what happened that night was that I had just put out the fire, and I intended to go into my tent and crash out. But it was a warm enough night that I just sort of sat there, smelling the smoke from the dying embers, and allowing my eyes to adjust to the darkness. Then out of the corner of my eye, I could have sworn I saw eye shine. That would mean an animal was watching me. I was a little nervous about returning the stare, so I held my head facing somewhat away from it and then briefly darted my eyes over into that area to see if I was imagining it or what. I got the quick perception that there were golden-colored eyes watching me, and that made me chuckle. I've seen owls in the night before, and they can have amber or orange gold-colored eyeshine, at least the kind of owls I've gotten to witness at night in the wild. So I relaxed and I turned my head to look directly at the eyeshine, assuming it was an owl, who would be unlikely to do me any harm at all. Well, that was not an owl. It was something that was like a dog or a wolf, but at the same time it was not like a dog or a wolf. I thought I was seeing the North American upright walking canid or Dogman, as it matched the descriptions I've heard of those. I had heard they were like dog versions of Bigfoot, but far more dangerous and vicious than a Sasquatch is supposed to be. I felt intense fear at the sight of him, just outside the edge of my camp, staring at me from the edge of the woods. I also felt awe and amazement, as you might too. I don't guess that any of that is really out of the ordinary, but the weird part for me is that I got very emotional. I started weeping uncontrollably. I don't mean crying, I mean my eyes wept. Tears streamed down my cheeks, but it wasn't like I was sobbing. I wanted to go inside my tent and hide, but instead I stood up, and I averted my eyes downward, and then I walked toward the beast. Now this is not something I would recommend, and if this were newly happening now, I don't think I would do it again. But this was 2020 and doing crazy things seemed to be the mood of the moment. So there I was, walking in the dark woods by myself toward what I thought was a man-eating Dogman. Why? Because he seemed more real than the human world had become to me, I think. He seemed uncorrupted and genuine, unlike human society, which had descended into idiots screaming over other idiots. I thought I was walking toward the king of the forest, and so I walked in such a way as one might before true royalty. I suppose this was foolish, now that I know the actual nature of my friend, but this is what happened, and that is how he came to accept me. The creature just allowed me to approach, and when I was immediately in front of the bush he was behind, I looked up from the ground, and our eyes met. His eyes were exactly on my level, and I thought we were precisely the same height as each other. And then the creature stood up. I mean, he stood up further. He had been crouching behind that bush. At his full height, he is between 7 and 11 feet in height. I know that's a huge range, but somehow he seems taller on some occasions than he does on others. I used to think this was because of his various postures, which are a combination of human and canine. He stands up more sometimes than others, it's hard to explain. I've recently also begun to suspect another reason for the size change. That it's not me imagining it, but that he is sometimes bigger than on other nights. I think now that it has to do with the phases of the moon, but I may be way off on that, I can't say yet. So anyway, there I was, standing in front of this bush, with the apparent Dogman standing behind it, now standing on its hind legs and much taller than I was. My head tilted back as he rose, and when he reached his full height, my knees gave out under me, and I knelt before my immense new friend. Doesn't exactly sound like the start of a friendship, I admit, but the werewolf seemed to take kindly to me, and he leaned over and smelled me in the way a dog does. He licked off some of the tears on my cheeks, and then he ran off into the darkness on his hind legs, like a human. I felt an intense simultaneous sense of relief and disappointment. Relief that he hadn't bitten my face off my skull, and disappointment that the creature was now gone from my life. I wrote about the event in my diary so that I would remember the facts later. Here's the way I described his appearance back then, in my handwritten diary. When he was sitting, his eyes were directly on my level, which means he is 6 foot tall when seated, in the way a dog sits on the ground. So I got to look right in his amber eyes that appear to glow in the darkness. His fur is all gray, a dark gray, and his ears stand up on top of his head in the way a wolf's ears do. I wouldn't really say he looked like a wolf, though. His face was basically wolf-like, but the fur was just not. It was thicker, or I guess curlier than a wolf's fur. Longer, too. It was a dog's fur, not a wolf's fur. I'm going to end the quote there because I'm having a hard time reading my own handwriting. I'll do the rest of this from my memory. When the creature was sitting down, his arms were held together in front, supporting the beast with its paws or hands held palm down on the earth. When the arms were pushed forward like that, he had a thinner form, and seemed not to have shoulders at all. When the creature stood up in front of me, however, it moved its arms back, and I saw its shoulders grow wider and wider as it stood further and further upward. It was like nature's version of Voltron or Transformers, with the creature looking incredibly different from its own self within only seconds. While sitting, it looked entirely canine, but when standing up, it looked like a mix between animal and human. I had never seen a cryptid before, and this experience was nearly religious for me. I felt like I had glimpsed how amazingly strange this world can be, and that I was blessed. It really was to me like the sky had opened up and God had winked at me, letting me feel included in the big secrets for a second. I apologize for going on and on about this, but I'm actually downplaying how moved and shocked and changed I felt after this visitation. I prayed before going to bed to say thank you, and I did the same thing again when I got up the next morning. After breakfast, I was sitting by a creek and writing a poem in my diary about the divine presence of the Dogman, when suddenly something shoved me sideways into the bank of the creek, getting me and my diary with my serious poetry inside, all covered in mud. I was pretty angry, as you can imagine, and I turned around to see who had dared to be so rude to me while I was writing poetry about the divine Dogman. But when I turned around, I saw the Dogman himself in the full light of morning, and he was neither standing nor sitting this time. This time he was charging at me on all 4 legs, his tongue flapping sideways in the breeze as he leaped upon me, throwing me backward once again into the water. It was only about 3 feet of water, but when I was under it, the Dogman landed on top of me. That served to expel what air I had in my lungs, and his weight prevented me from getting out of the water to breathe. I suddenly wished I had nostrils at the ends of my fingers, as they were up there in the air. but I was being held down by the large beast on top of me. Until I wasn't, and I was being flipped up into the air onto the back of the creature and walked back to the muddy shore. He shrugged me off, and I went splat into the mud and painfully refilled my lungs with air. My chest ached, and I was afraid of what the Dogman was going to do to me next. I had to focus on breathing and enduring the pain in my chest, which was not inconsiderable. If the Dogman wanted to hurt me worse, well, I wasn't going to be able to stop him. But when I finally felt well enough to look back up at the creature, I discovered that he had just been sitting there, watching me, intensely, with his head turned curiously to the side. The second I looked up at him, he leaped into the air on all fours and began wagging his tail so hard that his butt was wiggling and he was beating his own sides with his own tail. I would have laughed if such a thing were possible in that moment, but I do chuckle now when I think about it. So he wasn't trying to kill me. He was trying to play with me. Only he didn't know his own strength, or his own size. So all my fancy language about the Dogman got covered in mud, literally and figuratively. And I was forced to accept him as who he is, which is a very specific kind of a personality, not some godlike mysterious entity. This guy is a goof more than a god, and he is very friendly, at least to me. When I'm camping and humans come within a certain range, the Dogman will go into hiding until they're gone. This is so far without exception to the point where I've started to wonder if I'm the only one who could even see him. What I mean is, what if he's in my imagination and not real? He also leaves when I reach for my cell phone. I started to tell a friend of mine about the Dogman, but she mocked me, and so I stopped. She kept pointing out how convenient it was that the creature would only appear for me, and never allow me to take photos. When she said it that way, it even made me wonder if he's for real. But he has to be for real. I've gotten bruises and scratches from playing with him. I didn't do that to myself. So recently something happened that has caused our situation to change, and for me to feel confused about pretty much everything. You see, I found out what the Dogman really is. He is not actually a Dogman. At least, not full-time. He changes back to human form. I know this because I saw it happen, and now everything is strange between us. At least in my mind. That night, the Dogman and I played far later than we ever had before. I had my compass with me. He allowed me to bring that, but not my phone with my GPS on it. I kept checking it so that I would know my way back to camp. The Dogman and I could play like children. In fact, that's really what I feel like when I run with him. Or at least that was what I felt like. On that night, I followed the Dogman to this forest that was not a forest. It took me a while to realize that we were in some kind of manicured garden forest, if that makes any sense. It really mostly appeared like a path through unmanicured woods, but then you would find a statue in amongst the trees, stationed to be on display as you passed it on the path. What appeared natural at first was clearly someone's private space, and I began to understand that we were trespassing in some grand garden owned by a rich man. It was beginning to become dawn, and I felt like we were in a place that we had no permission to be. I turned to suggest to the Dogman that I wanted to head back to my camp, but there was something going wrong with him. Clearly experiencing some kind of discomfort, the Dogman whined and spun in circles. He seemed to become dizzy, and fell into some bushes. I had no idea what was happening, but I was very concerned for my friend, so I ran over. But when I got there, I did not see the Dogman. I saw a big naked human guy, and he looked up and saw me gawking at him and his nakedity, as my father used to put it. Anyway, this guy did not appreciate me looking at him, and he asked me why I threw him in the bushes. I told him I didn't, and I offered a hand to help him back to his feet, which he rejected. He covered himself with his hands and ordered me to stop looking at him. He called me some choice names, and he accused me of taking advantage of him while he was sleepwalking. Sleepwalking? Is that what you call it? I asked. And then this guy got really furious at me. It looked like he was going to get violent, so I just ran back in the direction of my camp while he was screaming something about the police. When I got back to my phone, I was able to find where I was and where that guy's manicured garden was on a map. I know the address. He lives a little less than 3 miles from my own home. Although I hope he never figures that out. I think he really does think I did something to him that morning. He also thinks his lycanthropy is only sleepwalking. This rich guy doesn't understand that he's a werewolf. He's in denial. I have a problem because I love my werewolf friend, but I just found out who he is when he's human. And this kind of changes everything for me. It's a little hard to explain, but I know I don't want to lose his friendship. The werewolf, I mean. The human side of him I couldn't care less about. So I headed back to my camp with the intention of packing up and going home, but I was so beat by the time I got back there that I just crashed in the tent all day long. By the time I woke up, it was too dark to hike home, so I realized I'd be spending one final night out there. I was sad that there would be no more Dogman friend, now that I found he was a human, and I accidentally made his human side hate me. But then, that night, as I was walking back to my tent after taking a pee, who tackled me and slammed me hard into a tree? The Dogman did. Or I suppose I should call him the werewolf. Once again, I wasn't sure if this was a real attack or a play one, as he plays rough and hard. But when he started licking my face, I could tell he thought he was only being funny. I have to say I am glad that the werewolf does not remember the human's life, so that maybe he and I can remain friends. I don't like the idea of ever running into his human half again, though. I feel like that guy could really hurt me or kill me. He already thinks I'm stalking him, which is very embarrassing on top of being a scary thing to be accused of. I guess it's ironic that I'm friends with a werewolf but terrified of his human side, but that is the situation I find myself stuck in. Part of me wants to move. I have a standing offer to work at my cousin's plumbing company. It's in a different state and the job would pay better than what I'm making now. But if I move, once I move, that would be the end of me having a werewolf as my best friend. And I have to say, that is not a very easy thing to consider giving up.
Find that link in the description, honey.
Yes, sir. No, sir. I mean, now, sir. Our executive producer is Michael Hauser. Hope I'm pronouncing that right, Michael. Please join us in welcoming our newest executive producer, Michael Hauser, who became a channel member recently and gets to see our secret uncensored episodes. Here to explain how you can see them too is our international TV spokesmongrel, Henry Lee Dogman. Hank. Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.